In 2023, a team of hydrologists mapping the Baltic seafloor for a renewable energy survey detected a strange anomaly: 9 elongated shapes resting in precise formation, half buried under 70 meters of silt. What began as a technical curiosity quickly escalated when one diver surfaced, clutching a corroded steel plate stamped with the faded eagle insignia of the Kriegsmarine. Within days, a joint recovery team unearthed crates marked Geheim Transport, Larkspur 1945, the name absent from every German naval registry. As sonar images leaked to the press, whispers began to circulate among historians and intelligence veterans alike. A vanished WWII convoy, erased from official history, possibly carrying experimental materials decades ahead of their time. Now, beneath the cold waters of the Baltic, the long-lost shadow of Operation Larkspur is surfacing, and with it, questions neither Berlin nor London seem willing to answer. Chapter 1. The Baltic Anomaly Report. At 0432 on June 14, 2023, the research vessel MS Friedenholm recorded an acoustic anomaly at coordinates 55°43N, 15°17E. The mapping project, commissioned by the Swedish Energy Agency, was intended to identify stable seabed zones for undersea cables, nothing more. Yet when sonar operator Leif Jorgensen enhanced the spectral return, 9 symmetrical echoes appeared in formation, resembling the layout of a wartime naval convoy. The lead hull measured 70 meters in length, with angular contours inconsistent with any recorded civilian or military design from that era. Jorgensen filed a standard anomaly log, Ref. Fred BT Scan 2023-614, and forwarded the data to the Swedish Maritime Administration. Within 48 hours, the file was quietly restricted under Defense Protocol, GRO 17. Foreign military object, pending jurisdictional review. The following month, Danish divers contracted for inspection made a partial descent. The team's body cameras captured eerie images of barnacle-covered steel, scattered munitions, and a partially legible marking: Transportgruppe Larkspur. By protocol, the footage was to be stored under Project Archive SEA 2231 BT Recov, but 2 copies surfaced in anonymous online archives less than a week later. The leaks drew attention from international historians and naval archivists, particularly Dr. Marta Reiss of the German Military History Research Office, who noted that Larkspur did not appear in any surviving Kriegsmarine convoy manifests. Her inquiries to the Bundesarchiv were returned with a single-page response: Operation reference unverified. Documentation destroyed 1946 under Allied authority. By late August, the site had been sealed by a NATO-supervised recovery operation under the designation Baltic Recovery Programme, Segment 4C. Local fishermen were instructed to avoid the exclusion zone. Coastal authorities cited unexploded ordnance risk. Yet satellite images from the European Space Agency captured a different picture. The presence of US Navy research vessel Thomas G. Thompson anchored directly over the coordinates. Journalists tracing the ship's transponder logs noticed that it had been rerouted from the Pacific just 2 weeks prior under a contract with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. No official connection was acknowledged. Recovered artifacts began appearing in closed-door briefings between Swedish and German intelligence officials. A corroded container, catalogued as Object 4C11, contained fragments of thin metallic foil embedded with lattice structures, far exceeding 1940s manufacturing capabilities. Chemical analysis suggested a heat-resistant alloy consistent with titanium composites used in aerospace applications nearly 2 decades later. Handwritten notes found inside the same crate referred to Radar Absorber Versuch 12 or Radar Absorber Experiment 12. Dr. Reiss, shown one of the photographs under non-disclosure, remarked that such material implied a level of radar countermeasure research only theorized during the late stages of the war. In September 2023, the German Federal Archives received an anonymous package containing microfilm rolls labeled Abteilung Wüste, Operation Larkspur, Mai 1945. The contents revealed transmission logs from the 9th Naval Transport Division, issued from Kiel on April 23, 1945, just 7 days before the German surrender. The orders instructed the transport of experimental freight and personnel to an undisclosed research facility in occupied Denmark under the supervision of an SS engineering unit. The final entry in the log read, Convoy reached Zone Nord, awaiting confirmation of clearance order. No clearance order was ever found. Parallel to these discoveries, British National Archives released a partially declassified intelligence memorandum dated July 1945. Codenamed Operation Grey Shield, it described Allied efforts to intercept German scientific transports suspected of carrying classified material pertaining to electromagnetic concealment technologies. The operation was terminated abruptly, and subsequent pages were heavily redacted. Curiously, the attached index cross-referenced an unknown item, GR-122 Baltic transmission, source corrupted. Analysts now suspect that this referred to radio intercepts from the Larkspur fleet shortly before it vanished from all records. By early 2024, investigators from Sweden's Försvarets Radioanstalt confirmed traces of unregistered communication signals matching those logged in 1945. Triangulation indicated the convoy's final position precisely aligned with the sonar discovery. As the modern investigation deepened, new questions emerged. Why was an experimental convoy carrying advanced radar materials ordered into the Baltic as the Reich collapsed? And who, in the chaotic final weeks of the war, authorized a mission that seemingly defied all military logic? The deeper analysts looked, the clearer one pattern became. Someone had ensured that Operation Larkspur was not simply forgotten, it was erased. The surviving documentation across Germany, Britain, and the United States displayed identical gaps. Page ranges missing, file numbers skipped, microfilm reels retagged under unrelated projects. The pattern suggested deliberate post-war coordination, likely through Allied intelligence clearinghouses established during Operation Paperclip. Those who studied the anomalies began to suspect that Larkspur's cargo, whatever it was, had not been lost to the sea. It had been found long ago and quietly absorbed into Cold War research, leaving behind only a fleet of ghosts buried beneath 70 meters of silence. When the first official recovery capsule surfaced in late winter, cameras were not allowed. Witnesses later described the smell of rust and oil, mixed with something chemical, sharp, and sterile. The crate, bearing an etched serial number partially legible as LSP 441 Chantove, was transferred to an undisclosed facility near Karlskrona. Within days, NATO divers withdrew and all subsequent access was suspended. The Baltic anomaly was declared resolved, no further exploration warranted. Yet the ocean does not bury secrets forever. As new sonar passes in early spring revealed additional metallic contours stretching beyond the initial coordinates, one conclusion became unavoidable. Operation Larkspur had been far larger than 9 ships, and whatever it carried was meant to stay hidden, not beneath the waves, but within history itself. Chapter 2: The Recovered Manifest Fragments. The first solid breakthrough in the Larkspur investigation came in February 2024, when a former Bundesarchiv conservator named Hans Kessler provided investigators with digitized microfilm reels that had never appeared in the official inventory. The reels were discovered misfiled within a logistics collection marked Oberkommando der Marine, 1944-1945, supply documentation, Flensburg sector. Kessler's notes indicated that the films had been sealed in 1952 under British supervision, labelled Classified, Custody Directive B4167, and never returned to open circulation. When examined under digital magnification, the reels revealed a partially burned manifest titled Transport List, Operation Larkspur, 27 April 1945. Though portions were illegible, the surviving entries listed Hauptladung, Versuchsobjekte, Experimental Materials, Abteilung Wüste, Projekt Nordlicht, followed by references to SS Technische Sondergruppe 9b and Lieferziel, Forschungsbasis Tondern. Historians immediately recognized the implications. Tønder, Denmark, referred to by its German wartime spelling, Tondern, was a Luftwaffe airship base repurposed during the final months of the war for experimental radar research under the authority of the SS Ahnenerbe. The term Projekt Nordlicht had appeared once before in a 1945 field report discovered by British occupation forces in Schleswig, but had been dismissed as a code name for meteorological operations. The Larkspur manifest suggested otherwise. Cross-referencing shipping codes revealed that the cargo originated from Peenemünde West, the same testing facility where early rocket and radar experiments were conducted under Dr. Kurt de Boos and Werner von Braun. It appeared that, as Allied forces advanced, a portion of Peenemunde's experimental archive had been evacuated by sea, its destination erased after the convoy disappeared. Declassified US naval intelligence reports from June 1945 provide additional context. A document marked ONI Report, RE 4049, Baltic movements referenced a cluster of unregistered German vessels observed east of Bornholm, suspected to carry materials of scientific interest. The convoy's identity was unknown, but the report contained coordinates nearly identical to those now associated with the wreck site. An appended note in the margin, signed by Commander R.M. Stokes, reads, "No visual confirmation. Possible scuttling to prevent capture. Recommend joint intelligence review with British SIS." What followed that recommendation was redacted under the Freedom of Information Act until late 2023, when page 6 was finally released, containing only 2 unredacted words: post-war utilization. When Swedish divers re-entered the site in March 2024 under civilian supervision, they recovered fragments of paper sealed in watertight glass cylinders. The pages were preserved by paraffin wax and stamped Abteilung Wüste. Transport Logistic Kiel. Laboratory reconstruction identified multiple line items referencing Graphite-Verbundplatten, graphite composite plates, Kupfermantelspulen, copper-coated coils, and Hochfrequenzempfänger M12, high-frequency receivers. These were components consistent with advanced radar absorption testing, a precursor to modern stealth coating technology. Further down the manifest, a chilling line appeared. Sondermaterial, 12 Behälter. Nur für Dr. G. Adler, nicht öffnen. Dr. Georg Adler had been a physicist attached to Peenemunde's electromagnetic research wing. According to post-war interrogations, he was presumed dead after May 1945. His name now reappeared, in black ink on paper drawn from the seabed after almost 80 years. Archival cross-checking led investigators to a British War Office memorandum dated September 1946, titled Recovered Scientific Assets, Category Z, within, subject, Adler, Georg, physicist, radar research. Status, extracted to US custody, June 1945. No subsequent reference exists in British or American databases. The phrase Category Z denoted assets absorbed through post-war scientific intelligence programs, many under Operation Paperclip. Yet Adler's file was absent from all paperclip manifests. If the convoy's cargo had included materials designated for Adler's research, and Adler had indeed been secretly relocated to the United States, then Operation Larkspur was not a last-ditch evacuation. It was an organized transfer sanctioned by parties on both sides of the collapsing Reich. In the spring of 2024, a small team of researchers under the European Historical Data Recovery Initiative began scanning archived Allied film reels for naval activity between April 25 and May 5, 1945. One reel, stored in the Imperial War Museum, under reference IWM F-12 RAF Recon film, Baltic Sector, contained aerial footage shot by a reconnaissance Spitfire on April 28. In the lower left quadrant of frame 112, a line of ships appears moving north-northwest. Analysts compared the footage with modern sonar renderings. The formation and dimensions matched perfectly. The film's flight log included a notation: contact, unmarked convoy. Transmission silence maintained. Base command orders: ignore unless engaged. Historians concluded that Allied command had likely been aware of the convoy and deliberately avoided interception. In early May 2024, a classified addendum surfaced from the archives of the US National Reconnaissance Office, an office not formally established until 1961. The file, dated retrospectively and marked Historical Source Integration Project 1977, referenced a Cold War review of foreign material exploitation origins. Among dozens of cross-references, one line stood out: Baltic Recovery, Larkspur, 1945, DARPA Project 1-12, Early Composite Materials. The arrow notation suggested a lineage between the materials recovered from the Larkspur, Convoy, and later American research into stealth and radar-resistant technology during the 1960s. If true, the so-called lost convoy had never been lost at all, its discovery perhaps only symbolic of a secret hidden in plain sight for decades. By summer 2024, public pressure mounted for transparency. Swedish Parliament requested the release of Baltic Recovery Programme, Segment 4C documents under Freedom of Information laws. The request was denied. NATO cited strategic materials security. Meanwhile, independent journalist Eric Norman obtained leaked photographs of the recovered crates. One image, though blurry, showed stenciled text: U.S. custody 1951, return prohibited. Experts confirmed that the marking style corresponded to early Cold War U.S. logistics protocols. The implication was explosive. Some of the crates retrieved in 2023 had already been recovered once before. Someone had returned them to the sea. Late one night, Kessler, the archivist who had provided the original microfilm, was found dead in his apartment in Kiel. Authorities declared it natural causes, but his laptop, external drives, and the original microfilm reels were missing. The only remaining trace of his work was an email draft left unsent, recovered by digital forensics. The final line read simply, "Larkspur was never German. It was a handover." As historians debated the meaning, the investigation reached a turning point. Beneath the layers of declassified reports, forged manifests, and Cold War substitutions, one conclusion grew inescapable. The convoy had not sunk by accident. It had been silenced, its disappearance serving a higher purpose, orchestrated not in Berlin or London, but in Washington and Moscow alike. Chapter 3: The Tunda Facility Investigation. On June 2, 2024, Danish archaeologist and military historian Sophie Lindholm led a small field team into the restricted marshlands north of Tunda, near the remnants of Luftwaffe Base 9 Ton. The area had been sealed since 1991 due to unexploded ordnance, but a recent ground-penetrating radar survey funded by the University of Copenhagen revealed subterranean anomalies inconsistent with the base's known layout. The largest anomaly, measuring 38 meters across, appeared directly beneath an abandoned concrete hangar identified as Building 12A. Lindholm secured temporary clearance under Danish Defence Order 41-7B and began excavation. By June 5th, workers exposed a rusted bulkhead door sealed with lead solder and marked in flaking red paint. Abt Wüste, Zutritt verboten. The translation, Department Wüste, access prohibited, immediately linked the site to the same division referenced in the recovered Larkspur manifest. Inside, the air was thick with ammonia and oil residue. Beneath layers of frost and concrete dust lay a narrow corridor lined with power conduits dating from the early 1940s. A stenciled sign read, Technische Sondergruppe 9B Nordlicht, Versuchsanlage. The discovery sent shockwaves through the European historical community. The long-speculated Project Nordlicht, mentioned in fragmented SS correspondence, was real. Over the next week, the team uncovered a subterranean operations chamber, its walls scorched and corroded by decades of water infiltration. Among scattered tools and metallic shards, they found fragments of heat-resistant plating identical in composition to those retrieved from the Baltic wrecks. Samples were catalogued as 2NCHM424 and immediately sealed by Danish Intelligence Command, citing potential chemical instability. Archival searches revealed that in early 1945, the Tunda base had been partially converted into a radar experimentation site under the command of SS Sturmbannführer Erich Weiss, a physicist with ties to Peenemunde's electromagnetic warfare division. Weiss's post-war fate was never confirmed. Soviet archives record his name among the missing after May 1945. Within a week of the Tunda discovery, investigators located a sealed archive room adjacent to the test chamber. Inside were wooden crates filled with binders wrapped in oilcloth, each bearing stamped identifiers. Nordlicht, Berichtfolge 12-18, April-Mai 1945. Danish authorities transferred the materials to the National Archives in Copenhagen for preservation. The first translated report described field trials of HF reflection reduction plates, detailing early attempts to alter radar cross-section signatures using multi-layer metallic coatings, a primitive form of stealth technology. The deeper investigators delved, the darker the implications became. One report, dated April 25, 1945, referenced human observation tests in electromagnetic absorption conditions. Although vague, several paragraphs described thermal and cognitive stress reactions of volunteer staff, suggesting experimental exposure to intense microwave frequencies. Historians compared the language to later documents from Cold War-era behavioral experiments, noting striking similarities in phrasing. The existence of this report implied that Nordlicht's research extended beyond aircraft camouflage. It had crossed into the realm of biological experimentation. A sealed envelope found among the papers contained correspondence from Weiss to Dr. Georg Adler, whose name had surfaced in the Larkspur manifest. The letter, dated April 26, 1945, stated, "Transportgruppe Larkspur will deliver the reflective plates and test data by 29 April. Ensure final transmission sequence before evacuation. Our benefactors have confirmed extraction." The signature line bore a distinctive double S rune, and below it, the handwritten note, "For continuation abroad." This phrase immediately drew attention from historians familiar with the post-war movement of German scientists through clandestine Allied programs. It suggested that both Weiss and Adler were expecting transfer to a foreign power, most likely via Allied arrangement, before Germany's formal surrender. 2 weeks after the Tunda excavation, Lindholm's team reported intermittent power surges within the underground site despite its disconnection from the grid. Infrared imaging detected residual electromagnetic activity around the corroded wiring of the test chamber. A technical unit from the Danish Defence Research Establishment was called in to investigate. Their report, marked restricted 6 to 24 ton, stated that the readings were consistent with self-contained field coils, still capable of generating limited charge through residual magnetism. In lay terms, the equipment had been dormant for nearly 80 years, but was not entirely dead. When one coil casing was opened, the internal configuration matched blueprints from an early US radar suppression patent filed in 1958 under a contractor later linked to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The connection was undeniable. Technology once buried beneath a Danish airfield had quietly resurfaced in American research decades later. By mid-July 2024, NATO officials imposed a full blackout on further excavation, citing contamination risk. Independent observers were expelled, and Lindholm's research permit was revoked. Within days, all recovered artifacts were relocated to an undisclosed location. When questioned by Danish media, the Ministry of Defence stated only that the site contains hazardous industrial material dating to the occupation period. Yet a satellite image taken by Environmental Monitoring Agency, Copernicus showed military transport vehicles departing the site under armed escort, an operation of a scale inconsistent with simple hazard removal. Weeks later, a classified memo leaked through an anonymous whistleblower, allegedly from within the Danish Intelligence Command. The memo referenced TON Facility, NATO Transfer Directive 7724, ordering the removal of all Category Red artifacts to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Attached was a single-page summary listing crate serials, matching those previously catalogued by Lindholm's team. The operation's codename, Operation Helix. The document also included an encrypted note reading, "Ensure reintegration with historical sample 4C11, Karlskrona custody." That serial number corresponded exactly to the container recovered from the Baltic anomaly. The two discoveries, ocean and land, were now undeniably linked. The revelation placed Lindholm under government scrutiny. Her communications were seized and her academic access credentials revoked. In one of her final interviews before disappearing from public view, she stated, "We found evidence of a technology that should not have existed in 1945 and indications that it was deliberately removed from history by those who benefited from it later. The Larkspur fleet wasn't carrying lost science, it was delivering it." Her words echoed across academic and intelligence communities alike, reinforcing an uncomfortable hypothesis. Operation Larkspur was not an escape, nor a failed mission, but a handover, part of a negotiated technological exchange arranged as the world transitioned from hot war to cold. By autumn, the Tunda facility was resealed under NATO directive. Satellite feeds now show only a leveled field where the hangar once stood, yet a single surviving entry from Lindholm's excavation log remains unclassified. It reads, Sublevel 3, evidence of second sealed chamber, entry impossible due to collapse, possible continuation eastward toward older tunnel network, direction 55 degrees N. The line cuts off mid-sentence. No follow-up entry exists. For now, the Tunda investigation is officially concluded. But in archival silence, the trail continues to hum faintly, like currents still trapped in rusted wires beneath the soil. Chapter 4. The Redacted Correspondence Archive. In September 2024, a sealed packet labeled NATO Shapecom 67B Archive was anonymously delivered to the investigative newsroom of Der Spiegel in Hamburg. Inside were digital scans of typewritten letters dated between 1946 and 1949, bearing British, American, and West German intelligence letterheads. The documents referenced continuing materials integration, source, Larkspur Cargo Series 4C12A, and Nordlicht residuals, reallocation per Joint Technical Agreement 49-6. None of the signatures were legible, each replaced by stamped initials and coded identifiers such as MN12 and CFR3. Metadata confirmed that the scans originated from within the NATO Historical Archive at Brussels, suggesting that someone with clearance had deliberately breached containment protocols. The files were verified authentic by linguistic and forensic analysis, confirming use of period-accurate typefaces, watermarks, and encryption marks consistent with post-war Allied intelligence correspondence. The earliest letter, dated 7th of March 1946, carried the header Ministry of Supply, London, and was addressed to Mr. H. Spear, Office of Military Government, U.S. Zone. Its opening line read, transfer of radar-absorbent plate samples from Baltic Recovery, April 45, to designated U.S. laboratories. The phrasing was unmistakable. The Larkspur materials had been recovered less than a year after the war ended. One annotation, handwritten in blue ink, warned, German origin to remain undisclosed. Program code revision, Project Helios, mutual. Researchers were stunned by the name. Project Helios had previously surfaced in declassified DARPA memoranda from 1962, referencing early orbital surveillance technology. If the naming convention was continuous, the lineage of post-war research extended from Larkspur's 1945 cargo directly into Cold War aerospace development. Another letter, bearing a faded US Army Air Force's seal and dated December 12, 1947, summarized a joint Anglo-American experiment conducted at RAF Waddington under the label HF Reflection Suppression Trial 2. The description referred to metallic coatings of German derivation, exhibiting anomalous magnetic permeability and dielectric behavior under radar sweep. The trial's results were marked. Successful, pursue integration. The signature block read only Approved CB, Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency. Analysts later identified CB as likely Colonel Charles Blundell, an officer associated with Operation Paperclip Asset Management. If accurate, the evidence demonstrated that Allied forces had quietly absorbed Larkspur's stealth material into early radar countermeasure programs, 2 decades before the concept officially entered military engineering. A third letter, originating from Bonn in 1949, indicated that fragments of the Larkspur Convoy's manifest had been reconstituted for documentation consistency. In plain terms, history was rewritten. It instructed the Bundesarchiv's Reconstruction Office to omit references to Abteilung Wüste, Technische Sondergruppe 9b, and Nordlicht Versuchsanlage. The order was classified under Directive D Consolidation 512, signed by the Allied Control Council. This confirmed suspicions raised months earlier by historian Martha Rice. The disappearance of German wartime research divisions from the record had not been accidental, but deliberate policy. Every trace of Larkspur's origins, its scientists, its materials, its purpose, had been methodically erased to maintain post-war political stability. The letters also contained encrypted telegraph transcripts labeled Helios Communication Chain, 1951. Among them, 2 short transmissions stood out. The first read, Sample 4C11 transferred, advise containment integrity before orbital testing. The second, Archive sealed, return artifacts to origin for controlled disposal. It was the only known instance of an order referencing the deliberate reburial or submersion of technological artifacts. Investigators now believe that return artifacts to origin was literal. Crates recovered from Larkspur were placed back into the Baltic sometime around 1951 to obscure their wartime provenance. This would explain why the 2023 recovery team discovered containers stamped with both German and American custody markings. The act was not concealment by the defeated, but by the victors. When Der Spiegel published excerpts of the letters in late September, the NATO Historical Archive released a terse statement claiming the documents were fabrications. Within 24 hours, The digital files were removed from all major hosting servers under cybersecurity directives. However, an unaltered copy remained archived by independent researcher Jonas Mertens, who noticed embedded metadata hidden in the scanned file structure. The metadata contained GPS coordinates pointing to an address outside Bonn, formerly the site of the U.S. Office of Military Government's Technical Liaison Branch. Excavation permits for the property dated back to 1951. The same year, the Helios transmissions referenced a controlled disposal. Mertens and Rice travelled to the site in October 2024, where ground-penetrating radar identified metallic signatures 3 meters below the current parking structure. German authorities denied them excavation access. On October 18th, Rice received a plain envelope without postage containing a micro SD card. The card held high-resolution scans of additional correspondence not present in the original leak. One file bore a red ink header, Project Helios, Classified Annex, 1952, prepared by Advisory Committee for Aeronautical Research. The document detailed the development of a prototype orbital reflector array constructed using high-permeability alloy plates of German derivation. The phrasing matched technical descriptions found decades later in U.S. patents linked to early stealth and satellite communication systems. The annex concluded with a line that silenced every historian who read it. Materials origin remains sensitive. Destroy all German design references before NATO transfer. The scope of the cover-up became undeniable. Operation Larkspur had not been a forgotten naval incident. It was the foundation stone for a global research lineage hidden under successive layers of classification. From radar absorption experiments to aerospace reflectors, from Nordlicht's underground chambers to Helios's orbital prototypes. The chain of custody formed an unbroken thread linking the final weeks of the Third Reich to the technological arms race of the Cold War. And yet, one final clue surfaced at the end of the correspondence chain. The last document, dated March 1953, was unsigned but bore a typed footnote. Upon completion, residual archive to be stored in Facility G11, Alps Sector, coordinates ref, Obersalzberg region. Rice traced those coordinates to an unregistered tunnel network below Berchtesgaden, formerly a Nazi command compound, later repurposed by US occupation forces. No excavation permits exist for the site. As she prepared to disclose her findings publicly, her email correspondence abruptly ceased. Investigators later found her laptop in her Hamburg apartment, powered on, with the final document open and a single unsent draft message to Jonas Mertens reading only, G11 still active. It never shut down. What G11 represents, storage facility, experimental site or archive, remains unknown, but its mention marked the beginning of the next and most dangerous phase of the inquiry. Chapter 5, Facility G11, the Alpine Extraction. On December 4, 2024, a small geophysical survey team working under the Bavarian Environmental Office detected subsurface anomalies beneath the limestone ridges south of Obersalzberg, precisely where the coordinates in the final Helios correspondence indicated Facility G11. The team had been mapping glacial runoff, channels near the old Berghof ruins, when their magnetometer returned a series of geometric signatures, parallel tunnels, deep chambers, and metallic reinforcement consistent with mid-20th century engineering. Within hours, the survey data was restricted by the Federal Ministry of Defense, citing unexploded ordnance and structural instability. 3 days later, all equipment and recordings were confiscated. The lead technician, Klaus Neumann, later described in an off-record interview, "We weren't supposed to find it. Whatever G11 is, it's still drawing power." The G11 designation was unfamiliar to official German wartime records, but appeared in US engineering logs from 1946 under the name Storage Site G11 Allied Scientific Custody Program. Those logs referenced a joint repository for captured electromagnetic research materials maintained under the control of the US Office of Military Government in Bavaria. When historian Jonas Mertens obtained copies through an anonymous source, he noticed that one page bore the handwritten note, linked to Helios Annex, secured 1952. This single notation tied the entire Larkspur Nordlicht Helios chain directly to a physical structure still buried in the Alps. In early January 2025, Mertens and 2 documentary filmmakers travelled to Berchtesgaden to locate surface access points. Using wartime aerial photography from the Luftbildarchiv, They identified an area near a collapsed tunnel entrance, designated Kommandoanlage Süd D3, sealed in 1948 by US Army engineers. Local residents spoke of an unusual military presence in the early 1950s. Convoys moving through the valleys at night. Heavy crates unloaded and disappeared into the mountains. None of the shipments were ever logged with customs or the occupation registry. One elderly witness, former forestry worker Otto Kramer, recalled being turned away from a trail by American guards who told him the mountain is still breathing. His account, once dismissed as folklore, gained new weight as the G11 rumors spread. Through declassified NATO procurement records, Mertens traced funding allocations in 1951 to 1953 to a project titled Alpine Containment Initiative. Its purpose? Storage and observation of sensitive post-war scientific materials pending international review. Budget entries abruptly stopped in 1954, replaced by a line item coded Special Research Holding 1024, classified under Bilateral Agreement 12A. The funding never ended. It was simply renamed and absorbed into NATO infrastructure. For 70 years, the site's existence remained buried under bureaucratic redirection and the natural decay of war memory. When the filmmakers attempted to capture drone footage of the Obersalzberg Valley on January 14th, local airspace controllers intercepted their signal. 2 hours later, they were visited by police and informed they had violated a restricted zone designated Luftsperrgebiet 47.5, Sicherheitseinrichtung Bund. The classification corresponded to sites of active defense significance. This contradicted official claims that no active installations existed in the region. Nonetheless, fragments of their footage survived. In one frame, a faint rectangular structure could be seen built into the slope, camouflaged with synthetic foliage nets. Heat imaging showed faint thermal output, low but constant. A facility once thought sealed since 1945 was alive. Days later, an encrypted email reached Mertens from an untraceable address. The subject line read, G11 Access. The attached document was a scan of an identification pass labeled Allied Scientific Custody Facility. G11, Clearance Level 3 bearing the date, 1603-1952, and an embossed NATO crest added, Post-1950. The signature field read, CB, the same initials from the earlier Helios correspondence. A handwritten annotation across the bottom stated, Transfer of residual alloy samples to Project Helios. Authorization to return surplus to origin, Baltic. The handwriting matched that on the 1946 Ministry of Supply letter. Whoever CB was, he had directed the entire operation, from the initial recovery of the Larkspur cargo to the final concealment beneath the Alps. In February 2025, satellite radar imagery captured sudden excavation activity in the Obersalzberg region following a minor landslide. Nighttime surveillance showed unmarked vehicles arriving under military escort. Within 2 days, the area was cordoned off. The German government issued no statement. When contacted by international press, a Defense Ministry spokesperson said only, routine maintenance of historical bunkers, no operational significance. Yet locals reported deep vibrations in the valley at night, as if heavy machinery were drilling into the bedrock. Independent analysts compared the acoustic patterns to tunneling operations used in modern, underground research facilities. Mertens attempted to deliver his findings to the European Parliament's Committee on Historical Transparency on March 1, 2025. He never arrived. His car was discovered abandoned in a parking garage in Salzburg. Personal effects undisturbed, laptop missing. Police listed the case as unresolved disappearance. 2 weeks later, his research partner received a small package with no return address, containing a hard drive wrapped in foil. The files within included scans of construction blueprints stamped G11, Maintenance Tunnel Access Revision 1963. One blueprint featured an annotation in red pencil, retained sample vault, pressure sealed, 4C11A recovered. The same serial number, 4C11, had appeared in every phase of the investigation: the Baltic crate, the Tunda transfer order, and the Helios correspondence. The artifact had travelled across decades, nations, and cover-ups, only to resurface again in the Alps. Experts studying the blueprints concluded that G11 was designed not as a storage site, but as a containment vault. Its schematic showed electromagnetic shielding, independent ventilation, and subterranean cooling lines typical of sensitive material storage. far more advanced than 1940s infrastructure. The configuration implied that whatever was being stored produced residual radiation or magnetic fields requiring permanent isolation. One engineer likened it to a sarcophagus for a technology no one could fully understand. In March 2025, a final leak appeared on an anonymous European military forum. It contained a single still image, a dimly lit chamber lined with ribbed metal walls, a cylindrical object suspended within, bearing a faint marking visible only under contrast enhancement, Nordlicht, Versuch 12. The metadata placed the photo's creation in 2023, not 1945. Someone had been inside G11 recently, documenting what remained. As spring thawed the mountain snows, all official records of G11 vanished from German defense registries. The airspace restriction widened, and satellite imagery was blurred at source. Yet deep inside classified archives, the serial code 4C11 persisted, reappearing in a 2025 NATO logistics document marked Asset Retention, Strategic Material, Non-Conventional, Custody Extended, 10425. Whatever Larkspur had carried in 1945, those impossible alloys, those sealed containers marked not to be opened, was still under protection 8 decades later. Somewhere beneath the Alpine rock, in a chamber built by the defeated and preserved by the victors, the last surviving relic of Operation Larkspur remains sealed. Power continues to flow through buried conduits. The air above Obersalzberg hums faintly at night, detectable only on certain radio bands. And every so often, during winter storms, local residents claim to hear it. A deep, rhythmic pulse, steady as a heartbeat, coming from under the mountain that was never meant to wake again.